Everyone, welcome back to the show. So far today, we have talked about impacts on medical school admissions. We've talked about the effects of pass-fail on student GPAs and academic performance in the admission process. And of course, like we like to do for all of our radio shows, is turn our attention now to college finance. So joining me, as you can see here on the screen, is my colleague from out east, Lori Peltier. Lori, hey, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ian. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you. And today we are talking about funding your college choice beyond the aid offer that you might have gotten from your school of choice. And I think most students are in a position now, it's May 7th. By the time this airs, it'll be May 14th. So most students have decided where they're going to attend. And there might be a little bit of wiggle room if they get an offer off a wait list, or maybe they're taking advantage of one of these extended enrollment deposits of June 1st. But I think it's most likely that students have sort of decided where they're going to go. Now, just to sort of set the parameters for the conversation here, when we say that we're talking about funding a college experience beyond the aid offer, I want to establish what that aid offer actually includes. So what are the things that we can sort of count on from a particular school before we look outside of that offer for new sources of funding?
So to clarify, there's nothing you can really count on, but what a student could receive is scholarship,
Okay.
grants, which are both free money that offsets the price, basically just discounts the price, work study, which is a part-time job on campus for the student, and then student loans, which we'll talk about in a minute. But basically, scholarships and grants are the big discounter from the price. So hopefully the student has received some of those. And so there's the sticker price minus their scholarships and grants, and that's what we're talking about funding.
Gotcha. And you can tell that Lori is the college finance expert because I'm the dummy that said you can count on funding. And she's the expert that says, well, hold on a second, you can't always count on that stuff. So let's talk about loans. I think that there are certainly lots of questions that families of seniors have now, probably more than ever, are coming your way. Let's just start with the very basics about borrowing money. So lots of families will borrow money to pay for college. What are the different types of loans that are going to be available to families that are looking to fund their education?
There's basically 4 different categories of loans. The first one is the student loan, and that's the one that you would see on your financial aid offer. If you fill out the FAFSA form, you will see a federal student loan on there. This loan is 100% in the student's name, and it's the only loan out there that's 100% in the student's name. But it has a very low maximum that the student can borrow. As a freshman, they can borrow $5,500.
Okay.
So when you're looking at the cost of some of these schools, it's usually one of the loans they take, but it may not be a loan large enough to cover the balance that they're looking at. So that's the first loan that's out there. It is a federal loan. It's very flexible. It's a very low interest rate. So we usually, if we had to make a recommendation, I would recommend that families start with that loan, but oftentimes they have to borrow more than that.
Gotcha.
So the second category is also a federal loan, but it's in the parent's name, and it's called a PLUS loan, a federal parent PLUS loan. The PLUS loan comes from the federal government, so it has some flexibility and some benefits to it that other loans don't have. A parent does need to pass a credit check. They're not looking for a specific credit score. They're looking to make sure you don't have a bankruptcy or foreclosure, like a bad mark on your credit. And if you pass, you can then borrow as much as you need to cover the cost for 1 year. So once you've figured out how much the school is going to cost, minus any scholarships and grants and minus the student loan, you could borrow the full balance if you wanted to. Go ahead.
Can I jump in real quick? I'm just sort of curious, when we're talking about the student loan versus the PLUS loan, is the student loan the best place to start because the interest rate tends to be lower than what you see with the parent loan? Or what's the reason for the student loan to be that first thing to look at?
Yes, the interest rate is one of the reasons. The interest rate right now on a student loan for this year is 4%.
Okay.
On a parent loan, it's 7%.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then the parent loan also has an origination fee of 4%.
Okay.
So it's a more expensive loan, but you can borrow more. So the other thing about the student loan, the parent could repay it. So you could take it, but not obligate your child to pay it back. The parent could assist in the payback. It's also a way for the student to earn a credit history. Because it's
Interesting.
in the student's name, if you wanted your child to start to build some credit for future purchases, that's one of the ways to do it.
Gotcha. Okay. And I interrupted. You were going to say the third kind of loan. So please
Right.
continue.
I can't count, Ian. So the third type of loan is what we call a private loan. And this is from an individual bank. Most of them are nationwide banks that offer these loans. And they call them student loans because they are in the student's name, but they have a cosigner.
Hmm.
No bank is going to let a student borrow all this money on their own. So they
Hmm.
want an adult on there. It doesn't have to be the parent, but it should be an adult with a good credit score. The better the credit score of the cosigner, the better the interest rate you get.
Hmm.
Where the federal loans have a set interest rate, everybody gets the same rate no matter what your credit history. The private loans will vary based on your credit history, your credit score. So if you have an excellent credit score, you could see a very low rate, and they also offer fixed and variable rates. So they have a lot of different options for how to pay it back and what your interest rate might be. And again, the private loans, you can borrow as much as you need if you have for the whole year. But both the student and that co-borrower are on the hook for that loan. So both of their credit scores are affected. If down the road a mistake is made and payments are missed, both the student and that cosigner are going to have a bad mark on their credit.
So the cosigner needs to be aware of how the student plans to pay it back and just make sure that they're keeping tabs on
Right,
maintaining
right.
payments as they go through the process.
Right. And
Gotcha.
so I find families who want the student to take more responsibility for their education sometimes do this private loan so
Hmm.
that the parent's there as a backup, but if the student, can afford to pay it, they will.
It sounds like
Um,
the private loan process, it sounds very similar to like a home mortgage where you might qualify for a better rate or a larger mortgage based on your credit history.
yes,
Private loans are fairly I guess you're working with a bank in both scenarios, so that it sort of
right,
makes sense that way.
right. So when I talk to a family about a private loan, I can't guarantee them any interest rate. I have to
Sure.
tell, they will publish their ranges, but they won't guarantee you a rate until they check your credit.
Understood. I see. And these three loans, so the student loan is obviously specific to education. The plus loan is a federal loan. You've got these private loans that are also called student loans. But what
Hmm.
about loans that are not specific to education? Are there
Hmm.
other things that families can go out and borrow? And what are some of the, pros and cons of doing that?
Right. So I'll talk about those in a minute because I wanted to get to my number four
Oh,
loan
there's a
that we
fourth. Oh,
yes.
I didn't even know. I thought it was just going to be three.
So the fourth
All
type of
right.
loan is a state-sponsored loan. So there are some
Okay.
states that offer loans. For example, I know New Jersey and Massachusetts are two of them. So if you live in those states or go to school in those states, you can get a loan, an educational loan from those states. And then a few of the colleges, usually more towards the Ivy League schools, have their own loans. So if they have a family who needs to borrow, some of the Ivy League schools have loans specifically from their institution to the family, and those are very low interest rates, like 2% or something. So if
Gotcha.
you have that option, definitely look into that. And in answer to your question about loans that are not specific to education, yes, you could do a home equity line of credit. You
Hmm.
could refinance your mortgage. So some families are finding that the rates of a loan tied to their home are a much better rate than they are on the education loan. But there's also a risk that goes with that because if you don't make your payments, you could jeopardize losing your home
Gotcha.
because and then the credit unions, oftentimes the credit unions will offer some personal loans at low interest rates that families might want to check out. So there's almost too many options, but it's a
Yeah.
good thing that they have options because everyone's financial situation is different and they want these options to research and find the one that's best for them.
Is it fair to say that as you're considering these options, you want to look at the total amount that you're eligible for, the rate, the interest rate for the loan,
Hmm.
and maybe other stipulations that are associated with that loan or possible collateral that might be included in that loan? Does that seem like the three things to look at?
Not so much collateral, but
Okay.
the repayment options. What
Okay.
happens if, we are all experiencing it now. What if you're unemployed? Can you put the loans on hold? Or are they always an obligation? Or are they any flexibility there? Um, that's one thing to look at. On the federal loans, they have a clause where I hate to even talk about it, if the parent or the student, whichever one is the borrower, is permanently disabled or deceased, the loan gets written off.
Hmm. Hmm.
And unfortunately, there are situations where that comes into play. So if that's important to you to have that kind of cushion to fall back on, then you would want to stick with the federal loans.
Understood. I see. And that's a great sort of reminder that repayments is always something to consider. I think that, I certainly just made this mistake. I think a lot of borrowers will make this mistake. It's just sort of what money can I get and what's the rate, but not thinking necessarily about what the repayment process looks like.
Hmm.
Um, and you had suggested that we could talk a little bit about deferring the cost without the accrual of interest on a loan. What does that
Right.
look like? Are there ways to do that?
There are. It's not a long deferment. What we're talking about here are monthly payment plans. So majority of colleges, I would say 90 to 95% of the colleges that I've dealt with do offer some kind of a monthly payment plan. So rather than paying a lump sum of tuition and fees in August and another big lump sum in January, you could join a monthly payment plan and spread out those payments over 10 or 12 months. During that time, that 12-month time, there's no interest accruing. So there
Hmm.
may be a small fee to join the payment plan, get you all signed up, and they check your credit for that as well, but they don't charge you any interest. So if you can afford to pay on a monthly basis and spread it out over 1 year, that's a way to do it without any interest accruing and borrowing a loan. And one other thing to remember is that the schools don't care how you piece it together. They really don't. As long as you've paid the bill on time
Hmm.
before the student steps foot on campus, you can do scholarships and 529s and savings and payment plans and loans. You could do 7 different options and piece them together to
Gotcha.
make up your solution. There's no one solution.
How how do people keep track of all of those sources? I mean, is it just sort of like each person has their own system and figures it out? I mean, how do you recommend that families sort of keep
You know,
everything in order?
that's a good point. I do think families need to keep track and then keep a good eye on it. I have seen some horror stories where a family might borrow from one loan freshman year and a different loan sophomore year and a third loan,
Mm,
so then but they're in repayment and they're missing payments because they don't realize they have so many balls in the air, like which one is due and who they borrowed from. So I do think it's something to stay on top of with maybe an Excel spreadsheet or some kind of a chart that says, this is what we have due, this is how we're covering it, and it's semester by semester. So it is a challenge, it's a project.
yeah, and then back up your files, make sure you've got a copy in an external hard drive or
Yes,
saved in the cloud or whatever to
yes,
be
yeah,
safe.
yeah,
Um, Not slips of paper in a file cabinet, right? Like we
yeah,
want we want to make sure we've got some redundancies there.
right.
Final thing I wanted to sort of ask is, what are some financing tips that families might not consider? What are some things that
Hmm.
usually don't know and they have to come to an expert like you to figure it out?
Well, I do think you have to think a little creatively. Turn over every stone, look through the sofa cushions. Is there any loose change in the sofa that we could pull to pay for college? Um, Does the student have savings? A lot of people they save money or they give their child financial gifts throughout the year, but then they're like, no, I don't want them to pull from that to pay for college. Well, why not? What are you saving it for? Why borrow a loan if the student's sitting on $5,000 in their bank account?
Hmm.
So look at all the different resources, the student savings, the student earnings, and those expenses that the family might have that are ending. So maybe a car payment or a credit card has been paid off. So now you have that monthly payment you were making to the car loan, pay it to the college, or the expenses that a student has while they're in high school, athletic fees, SAT prep, driver's education, or private high school, or contributions to your 529 plan. There's a lot of expenses in high school that families are shelling out that you may want to redirect towards the college expense.
And that's a great actually reminder of a lot of those expenses are not happening right now because programs have
Hmm.
been canceled. There aren't sign up fees for spring
Hmm.
sports, et cetera. And so maybe if you're a parent of a student who's in high school, you might think about reallocating some of that money to
Hmm.
savings or to 529s or whatever it may be, so that
Right,
you're more prepared when the bill comes due and you've got these, this money that you can fall back on.
right.
Who knows? Lori, thanks a lot for coming on the show and making sure that we're both counting correctly. I'm sorry to I cut off
That's
that
okay.
fourth option. Yes. So that does it for another episode of Getting In. We're enjoying the opportunity to come to you each week, both over the airwaves and on video. You get to see us. It's great. If you're enjoying listening, don't hesitate to leave us a review on iTunes or anywhere else you get your podcasts. The more 5-star reviews we get, the more likely people are to find our good advice, to hear from people like Lori, who are great experts. So help us in reaching as many students and families as possible. Give us a review. Next week's show, we'll turn the attention over to younger students. So we're going to talk about tips for ninth graders who are preparing to map out their high school courses. We'll talk about getting started on extracurricular activities and even ways to start thinking about the saving and paying components of college for early high school years. So you won't want to miss it. Until then, you should mask up, wash your hands, keep that distance. You got this. Have a great, great week.